Welcome to part 2 on our lesson on the French Revolution. This is our basic lecture through our course to get you up to speed on what exactly happens in France during the revolutionary period. In the previous lesson, part 1, we looked at the causes of the French Revolution. If you need to review those, please feel free to go back to that lesson. This lesson is going to focus on the events leading up to the start of the actual physical violence, well, not violent, but the physical part of the revolution. So things are going to start happening in this lecture. So we're going to actually start with Louis XVI, as he is now being forced to take some actions himself. France is in significant debt leading up to the years and the decades prior to the revolution. For every dollar, essentially, that was coming in taxes, 3/4 of each of those dollars was being paid off to pay off the French debt. France is a wealthy, powerful country that was being run very poorly. And Louis is at the point right now where he has to do something to pay off this debt. Louis needs to raise taxes. Now, currently, the only people paying taxes are members of the Third Estate, and they're being taxed ridiculously high. They also don't have enough money to cover the amount that Louis needs to raise to pay off France's debt. So France has to make a decision. Louis has to make a decision, and he decides that what needs to be done is he needs to tax the nobles. They're really the only ones with any kind of significant money, and they have never paid taxes before. And when Louis announces that he will begin taxing the Second Estate, he's going to make quite a few enemies amongst the nobles. But the nobles are not going to just sort of take this lying down. The nobles are going to play a very important hand that they have, a very important card in their hand, and that is to call together a meeting of the Estates-General. So the Second Estate essentially tells Louis, yes, we will agree to pay a tax only if it is approved by the Estates-General. So we need to know what the Estates-General is. Well, the Estates-General is an assembly of representatives of France's three estates, the First, Second, and Third Estate. And this has not met together for almost 200 years, basically when France began to turn into more of an absolute monarchy. So the Estates-General is a representative body of the people of France. But the rules of the Estates-General are also pretty antiquated. Each estate met in a separate room, so members of the clergy met separate from the nobility, which met separately from the Third Estate. Now, there were more members of the Third Estate represented in this body, but the problem was each estate had one vote. So ultimately, the First Estate had a vote, the Second Estate had a vote, the Third Estate, which represents 98% of the population, had one vote. 2% of the population could outvote 98% of the population, and that's typically how the voting went. So the First and Second Estate would use their votes to outvote the Third Estate. And that's pretty terrible, something that needs to be changed. The Estates-General is going to meet in the Palace of Versailles, about 14 miles outside the city of Paris. The Palace of Versailles, built by Louis XIV, Louis XVI's grandfather. And again, another symbol of France's wealth and power and maybe misuse of money. Very opulent, very extravagant. And that's where the Estates-General is going to meet, the first time that they've met in 175 years. And despite all of the problems of the Estates-General, this is a tremendous opportunity for the Third Estate. And the people going to Versailles to represent the Third Estate are mostly from the bourgeoisie. This is that upper part of the Third Estate. And these are the people who become essentially the original leaders of the revolutionary movement. And they see this as a chance to actually get something for themselves. Despite the uphill battle of the First and Second Estate and the voting rules of the Estates-General, this is really an optimistic time for the Third Estate, that this is a real opportunity to do something and to make some real changes. It's been no one was alive the last time this happened. So this is a big deal. One of the first things that the Third Estate demands that the king do, though, is to make sure that all three estates meet in the same room. The Third Estate, having much more members, could use that to their advantage to kind of intimidate the First and Second Estate. But Louis, who, again, is not a very strong or smart leader, answers to the Third Estate that no, there will be no changes in the meeting areas, there will be no changes in the voting procedures, we will go about business as usual. And because of that, the Third Estate begins to become very frustrated already. So asking the king to change the rules gets them a resounding no from the king. But the third estate is going to get some inspiration from this guy here, Emmanuel Joseph Saillet, who's actually a member of the first estate. He's a priest, a member of the clergy. He was a big supporter of the third estate. And if you think about churches and religion and religious doctrines, it kind of makes sense that the church should really support the people in the third estate. So he wrote a pamphlet titled, "What is the Third Estate?" And in this pamphlet, he's going to encourage the third estate to take advantage of this opportunity to do something, to form what he's going to call a national assembly. And he says in the pamphlet, what is the third estate? The third estate is everything. And think about the numbers, right? The third estate is 98% of the people of France. So if we had a room of 100 people, 98 of them would be in the third estate. They are everybody. They are France, and they need to do something. So the third estate gets super hyped up during this pamphlet reading, and Saillet is a big hero to them. And this really gets them excited to actually do and make some changes. So on June the 17th, 1789, the Third Estate, inspired by Saillet's pamphlet, votes to form the National Assembly. Now, they don't have any power to do this. They don't have any authority to do this, but they do it anyway. So what is the idea behind this National Assembly? Well, what they want to do is they want to form this representative body. They want to sort of establish a Congress or a parliament that would represent the French people and that would make laws for the French people. Well, if they do this and they get this, then they're going to change France from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. And that's not what Louis wants. This is an attack at Louis's power. It's an attack at his absolute power, because if they become this National Assembly and they make laws for the people of France, well, then that reduces Louis's power. And this is really the first step in the French Revolution, this creation of the National Assembly. They can't do it. They're not allowed to do it. They're not permitted to do it, but they do it anyway. And it's very important that they do. This begins the path towards the revolution. The Third Estate is now taking aggressive actions to do something, to change something in this government. And you can imagine Louis is not very happy about it. Which brings us to one of the first big events of the revolution, the Tennis Court Oath. So on June the 20th, 1789, this Third Estate, now known as the National Assembly, shows up to their meeting and finds themselves locked out of their meeting hall at Versailles, locked out by the king. So they show up and there's chains on the door. There's a sign that says, you are locked out of your meeting and you cannot be here. Not really, there's not really a sign on the door. But they go and the door is locked. The king is forcibly preventing them from meeting, which angers and infuriates this Third Estate, now called the National Assembly. So they decide to break into Louis's indoor tennis courts, which they're going to do. And they are going to get together here in the tennis court. Not an awesome picture. Whoops. They're going to get together here in this tennis court, and they are going to take what is called the Tennis Court Oath, which is basically a pledge or a promise that they will not stop meeting until a new constitution is written. It's a little bit better quality picture here. You can see them writing the pledge here, taking the pledge here, their hands in the air in this very Romanesque salute. So what does the pledge say, this tennis court oath? It says, "Let us swear to God and our country that they will not disperse until we have established a sound and just constitutions as instructed by those who nominated us." Okay, so this says basically we're not going anywhere until we see a new government put into place. So this is another of our symbolic and important parts of this revolution. And this is an important event. Mildly violence with the breaking into the tennis court, setting us up for maybe some more violence later on down the road. Now, after the tennis court oath, a few members of the First and Second Estate decide, hey, this is probably not going in the right direction. We should probably join up with the National Assembly. So not everybody in the First and Second Estate does this, but a few of them do, and that just allows the National Assembly to have more influence and to feel sort of better and stronger about themselves. It also worries Louis, and he believes that he needs to do something to maybe show some strength, show some force. So he makes a bad decision, and the bad decision he makes is to bring the troops from the countryside in towards the city of Paris. So he orders the troops moved towards Paris, and this begins to freak everybody out. One of the other big themes of the French Revolution that we'll talk about is fear. Fear and panic and paranoia are very, very, very powerful. And this is the first instance where we're really going to see fear put into play here. So fear in the city of Paris begins to grow. What is the army doing here? Is the king going to use them to stop the National Assembly? Is he going to march through the city of Paris and kill all of us? And there's a lot of panic and a lot of fear in the city of Paris. And this is going to lead us to our next significant event, the storming of the Bastille. So these rumors of violence at the hands of the French army spread throughout the city of Paris. Believing that the king is going to use force to not only stop the National Assembly, but to go through and massacre the people of Paris. Now, these are kind of ridiculous rumors, but that's what rumors are. They're always kind of ridiculous. But given the situation and given the scenario, to a lot of people in Paris, this makes sense. And people begin to panic. And once people panic and things get out of control, it's really hard to stop all of this. So as the people begin to panic, they feel like they have to defend themselves, and they need gunpowder. So people begin to gather up their weapons, but most importantly, besides having a gun, you needed gunpowder. And the place that held the gunpowder was a place called the Bastille. Okay, the Bastille is an ancient prison located basically in the center of Paris. And it's no longer really a castle, but has become a prison. So this is hundreds of years old. It's a symbol of the old regime. It's a symbol of the king's power and authority. This is where people are typically executed. This is where people are, there's stories of torture and all sorts of terrible things. So the Bastille is a place that everybody knows and is definitely a scary place, a ominous place, and a place of, sort of terror and fear of the king, fear of the king's power. And this is where the gunpowder is stored. So the people decide that it's time to go and get the gunpowder and protect themselves. So on July 14th, 1789, a mob of a couple of hundred French citizens storms the Bastille that's being guarded by about a dozen or so men. After a while, they burst into the Bastille. Most of the guards surrender. They capture the governor of the Bastille, the guy that's in charge. They kill him and cut off his head, and release the prisoners and seize the gunpowder. And it's this big, huge victory for the people. It's a big celebration afterwards, and it's the first real violent act of the revolution. This violent act of rebellion to physically overthrow the king. And to physically seize control of the gunpowder and all of the resources. So these are the people, taking action against their king and seizing control of things for themselves. We've got a couple of drawings here celebrating the storming of the Bastille. And speaking of storming the Bastille, they're going to take the governor and they're going to behead him and put his head up on a pike, which you can see here in this engraving. And that becomes a big tradition of the revolution, heads on pikes. Some other things that we begin to see, other symbols of the revolution, besides the severed heads, we have the tricolor flag, which becomes a symbol of the revolution with the blue, the white, and the red. We also see in lots of images the Phrygian cap. Now, this is actually an ancient symbol that goes back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And if you were a slave who was freed, this is the type of hat that you would wear, this Phrygian cap. And it was a symbol of your freedom. So the people of France, feeling like they are freeing themselves from the slavery of the king, begin to wear the Phrygian cap as well. Also the cockade, the red, white, and blue, sort of like a button, if you will, you would wear on your clothing to show that you supported the revolution. We also see the Bastille appear in lots of revolutionary artwork. We can see here supporters of the revolution carrying the Bastille. We also see other imagery. We saw previously the first and second estate riding on the backs of the third estate. Now we see the third estate is rising, breaking his shackles, gathering up weapons against the first estates. And we can also see the Bastille here in the background. So things are beginning to change, and these symbols are going to become very powerful parts of the revolutionary period. Now, the violence that's taking place with the Bastille is taking place in the cities, in the urban areas, and that's where we're going to have most of our revolutionary actions taking place. But also, this fear of the king is going to spread out into the countryside, and this leads us to an event called the Great Fear, which takes place from July 20th through August the 6th, 1789, so a little over 2 weeks. And what we're going to see in this Great Fear is that the peasants are going to go out and lash out against the nobles. So out in the countryside, we don't have a Bastille to attack. We don't have a big prison to tear down, but we do have the nobles, the nobility, the people that own the land that we work on and essentially own us, the people that force us into this estate system, the people who have all this wealth and don't share any of it with us. So during this Great Fear out in the countryside, the peasants are going to attack and terrorize the nobles. In some places, they're going to burn their houses down and fields. They're going to rob and loot. They're going to go in and find the paperwork for their, the deeds to the land and the contracts they signed and tear them up. And the peasants are going to demand that we end this feudal estates system, that we put an end to everything. So this lasts until about August 6, 1789, and eventually kind of dies down. So here at the very beginnings of the revolution, we see violence starting right away. The Great Fear from the peasants in the country back to the storming of the Bastille by the people in Paris. So violence becomes a big part of this revolution, and we're going to see violence, unfortunately, continue throughout. The revolution goes through a lot of violent phases. But after the Bastille and after the Great Fear, things are going to calm down a little bit. And in our next lesson, we are going to start to look at the revolutionary government taking some power and starting to make these changes. And we'll see what happens when they begin to do that.